And tonight, a dawn of a new era. Supreme Court orders court proceed on leave mantra used by governments to sack public service workers to be a thing of the past. We have details of the court's full judgment on Daniel Yao Domelevo's case, which has reinforced the independence of some key state institutions. And top story, as always, is brought to you by Vodafone. I am Blessed Tugai. The Supreme Court, as we know it, has ordered the practice where public servants are directed to, quote, proceed on leave to be a thing of the past. This conclusion of the court is contained in its latest detailed judgment in the case filed by civil society organizations, the Ghana Center for Democratic Governance, and 8 others challenging President Akufo-Addo's directive to the Auditor General, Yao Domelevo, to proceed on leave. At the time, the court, it says, as will be recalled, described the move as unconstitutional. It, however, deferred the release of its full judgment. It has now released that full reasoning, and we have a copy of this decision, which could potentially have some far-reaching consequences and implication for the matters of the state and governance. Let's get more from our legal correspondent, Joseph Akable, who has a copy of this ruling by the Supreme Court and reasons going into why the court is now making this fresh directives. Let's get more from Joseph Akable, who's joining me on the telephone now. And Joe, first off, let's talk about the court and what explanations exactly it is giving to this directive, court proceed on leave. We know at least that that's what the president did in the case of Daniel Yao Domelevo.
And so first, the court deals with the issue of what a leave is, and actually makes the point that leave is a constitutional right that is provided in Article 24(2) of Ghana's Constitution, which indicates that every worker shall be assured of rest, leisure, and reasonable limitation of working hours and periods of holidays with pay as well as remuneration. It goes on to say that this particular statutory constitutional right has been given statutory recognition in sections 20 and 31 of the Labour Act, and goes on to say that there's no such thing, therefore, as accumulated leave, except in certain exceptional circumstances which are provided in the Labour Act, including but not limited to equitable consideration. It goes on to make the point that the Labour Act is designed to cure mischief in the past, which entitled workers to sell their annual leave for cash payable by their employers. And so the court says that this forms an obligation where the non-performance, which fundamentally affects another. The court goes on to say that the duration of leave days a worker is entitled to, the period, timing, manner and circumstance of enjoying the right are matters that are subject to agreement between the worker and his employer. In these circumstances are purely a human relations function handled within an organization, particularly under the collective bargaining agreement and other laws that govern the relationship between the employer and the employer. So it makes the point that the framers of Ghana's Constitution could not have intended to create a simple employer-employee relationship between the appointing president and the Auditor General, thereby making the president a human resource manager administering the leave schedule of the heads of independent governance institutions.
Okay, I want us to situate that within the case of Daniel Yao Domelevo, because at the time he was the Auditor General running the Ghana Audit Service, and yet we saw the president give that clear directive asking him to proceed on leave. The court has made its decision, but what do they have to say in relation to the order, quote, proceed on leave?
The court says that the presidency, it appears, failed to consider that the Auditor General's office as head of the audit service forms part of the independent constitutional bodies. Hence, the Auditor General cannot be compelled to proceed on leave by any authority, especially where the effect of the directive was to interfere with the performance of his constitutional mandate. The directive of the president requesting the Auditor General to proceed on leave under sections 20 and 31 of the Labour Act, Act 651, violated the functional and institutional independence of the Auditor General. Specifically on that comment about proceed on leave, the court says that as a policy court, it was mindful of the practice which has developed in the country over the years whenever there was a transition from one government to another to right to direct public service officials to proceed on leave. It says, being a constitutional right, it was not within the contemplation of the premise of the Constitution that leave should be used as a form of punishment to get rid of unwanted workers and public service officials from their positions. And so we direct that the mantra, quote, proceed on leave, end quote, should from today be a thing of the past in this jurisdiction. The court explains that what should happen going forward is that if you want to sever a relationship with any worker, look at the appointment letter, look at the collective bargaining agreement, look at the conditions of service, look at the regulations and the human resource policy framework manuals which provide for the severance relationship between the employer and employee, and not to ask the employee to just proceed on leave, after which you constructively proceed to dismiss such an employee.
And this, coming from the apex court of the land, signifies that there's a far-reaching implication. In fact, some will argue this is, conventionally becoming law. The fact that this order, court proceed on leave, will not apply in similar cases to persons running independent offices as well, correct?
In fact, there are parts of the decision where the court makes reference to other independent institutions. Reference is made to the Electoral Commission, the Commissioners for Human Rights and Administrative Justice, among others. And just to read that part of the judgment, because, the presidency had made the argument that as the appointing authority, the Constitution entitled him to exercise disciplinary control over such employee. This is what the court has to say about that. It says, if we were to adopt this interpretation, it will mean that the president could direct the Chief Justice, the Commissioners of the Electoral Commission, and the Commissioners of Human Rights and Administrative Justice to go on leave at any time, even during critical periods, solely at the president's discretion. How would Ghanaians welcome the news if the president directs the Electoral Commissioner to proceed on an accumulated leave in the twilight of an election? This would disregard the demands and necessities of the given circumstances, as the president holds sole authority over their appointments. Such an outcome, the court says, would be absurd and encroach upon these important institutions' independence. Consequently, the court said that it is imperative that it interprets Article 297A in a manner that respects the functional independence of these officers and preserves their ability to carry out their duties without undue influence.
Joseph Akable, our legal affairs correspondent, helping us to understand the details of this latest Supreme Court ruling. But I want to bring in now lawyer Martin Kpebu, who's joining us in this whole conversation. In fact, we'll definitely be hearing from Labour analyst Austin Game on what he makes of this very ruling and how we can apply that going forward. Lawyer Martin Kpebu, thank you for your time here on Top Story. Clearly, the president taking an unconstitutional decision, but a lot of water has gone under the bridge, as many would describe it. How do we remedy the situation going forward?
Okay, so remedy going forward. All right. So I think what is, like you said, a lot of water has gone under the bridge. So this judgment serves as a warning, as a hindrance to such further unconstitutional action in future, because they've been very clear. They've compared with other African countries, Kenya and South Africa, and the court has come to one unanimous decision that asking the Auditor General to go on leave is constructive dismissal. You see that's what the court actually said in another part of the judgment, that such a decision amounts to a constructive dismissal, so it should not be countenanced. The court also made it clear that the president was acting as a human resources manager by interfering in the internal affairs of the Auditor General's office, right? Okay. So with this, I think it's very clear. A judgment that says that the president was acting like a human resources manager is certainly one that Ghanaians will not forget. If you look at that statement, the president of the republic is being likened to a person acting as a human resources manager in the internal affairs of the Auditor General's office. We won't forget. So it serves a good purpose. Let's continue the education, let's continue the debate, and hopefully it won't recur. Because remember, the court also referred to Professor Mills' conduct in 2009 in asking Professor Adjman to go on such leave. And so the court said such conduct cannot be countenanced. And so we hope that we've drawn this in a line under it. And so we shouldn't go back to such a. And also, very, very useful. You see in the judgment, they also made references to the 6 other independent constitutional bodies. So you are talking about the Electoral Commission, Lands Commission, National Media Commission, and so on and so forth, right? So they're saying that this decision can be likened to all of them. So this decision actually breathes life into and some protection into the work of the other independent constitutional bodies. And so this is very, very commendable. You could see that, wow, little by little we are making progress. This is not unanimous FC in the derogatory sense, but rather the very positive one. I remember the last I was saying Justice Dochi was making a reference to that distinction, unanimous FC in a derogatory sense and unanimous FC in a very positive sense, like this one.
I see. And in fact, that's bringing up the question about why successive governments have done this over the years. The point about the blurred lines, the assumption we've been making over the years that, well, if the president is the appointing authority, then certainly he has powers over such individuals. But we'll get into that shortly, Lawyer People. Just keep that on the sidelines for me. Let's also hear from lawyer, of course, Mr. Austin Gami, who is a labor consultant, so understands what's happening here. And when the court says that you have the right to negotiate the terms for your leave and what right and how you can go about enjoying that constitutional or legal right, what exactly is the court saying, particularly for those who have been under the impression that your appointer has the power to direct you to go on leave?
Thank you very much. To be very honest with you, I would have been surprised if the Supreme Court gave a verdict contrary to what they have said. I have virtually said everything they have said in the public space at the time of the controversy. Virtually everything. Now, you recall that I formed part of the team. Indeed, I was the chairman of the committee that wrote the law. We generated over 2,000 pages of information arriving at the 175 sections of the law. And clearly, this is an industrial relations practice, not a traditional adversarial legalistic mindset was used in arriving at it. And so it's an applied law, not an interpretable law per se. So if you don't have people with the mindset of learning the processes of ensuring that this law is properly applied as it's intended to achieve, you run into this kind of conflict. Now, let me explain to you. Clearly, all manner of policies and contracts that might be directed whether by a president, by a vice president, or anybody, which will have to be, it must be in conformity with both Article 24 of the 1992 Constitution, which is simply the directive principles of state policy, and also especially Section 31 of the Labour Act. And 31 is very clear. Now, annual leave to be taken by a worker is purely a function of a human resource management practitioner, not just even any head of department, unless you are specifically assigned to undertake such duties because of the character and nature of people management side of any undertaking, any company, if you like. So it was an aberration of what the law intends to achieve when I heard the executive secretary of the president challenging an innocuous suggestion I made that they should never make that mistake by getting Mr. Domelevo out of office on force by force leave. It's completely in error, and they should stop it. They didn't listen to it. I tried to explain in diverse ways. They didn't listen. The long and short of it is that as a process, at the beginning of every year, it's expected that HR practitioners will cause a memo to be sent to all heads of departments to get their workers. And remember, everybody is a worker in this country, including the president himself. And therefore, you will indicate the possible date on which you want to proceed on leave. Then, when it is all brought to the HR, because the work must not be disabled at any point in time, they will have to find ways and means of aligning the dates and the functions throughout the year so that people can easily take their leave without disturbing the processes of work at the workplace. Especially when it comes to, like was rightly said by the Supreme Court, those commissions, including the National Labour Commission, which are purely operating without control and directive of anybody, including the president, should not be made by an outsider. An outsider here means the president, because it's not the HR practitioner of audit service.
Yeah, I get the point.
Can't do that.
I get that point. And in fact, that's also another highlight that we need to pay attention to. Lawyer Martin People, let me also take your thoughts on that. I was indicating earlier, part of the reasons why we see that happening over the years, and not just by the Akufo-Addo administration. In fact, going back to the statement that directed Yao Domelevo to proceed on leave in 2020, points to, first of all, Section 20 of the Labour Act, describing such institutions also as public organizations, and that their workers accordingly will be treated as public officers. Then point 2, in that statement, asking Yao Domelevo to proceed on leave, equally pointed to precedents, as we had it, when, of course, in April of 2009, the Evans Tamils regime equally asked Ajimandia to proceed on leave. So a matter of convention, and also the arguments by the president that these individuals are public officers.
Yes, so that is why the Supreme Court gave the answer that, look, the fact that you repeat a constitutional breach 1,000 times will not ripen that breach into a legal conduct. So once it's unconstitutional, it will remain unconstitutional even if you continue that practice 1,000 times. And that's poignant because they refer back to the decisions dating from the 80s, where the Supreme Court has consistently been clear that if something is unconstitutional, it doesn't matter how many times you repeat it. So the court was clear that Tamils acted unconstitutionally, and so President Akufo-Addo couldn't rely on the unconstitutional conduct as precedent. And that's good. So that's why we keep saying that, yes, this decision has moved us a notch or two higher in our democracy, because now you see that the president has lost face. He's lost a lot of reputation. He was touted as, he had no equals, A rating, okay, all manner of toutings. And with this one that even Domelevo could read the constitution and tell him that, hey, boss, listen, you're acting unconstitutional, and he wouldn't listen. It's lost a lot of reputation. And so I'm sure future presidents will be very, very careful not to go near such conduct.
And in fact, that's what I want to take your thoughts on about what the president likely may be opening himself up for. Some say this is an unconstitutional act and giving, the grounds for, it may be far-reaching, but for impeachment, for instance, the president is opening himself up for that as well. There are those who go ahead to point out to some remedies that Yao Domelevo could take advantage of. Looking at the dictates of the law, what openings are there?
Yeah, so the argument that he would open himself up for impeachment, you know what? This Kwete, right? Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Just not been fortunate. Yeah, I've not been fortunate to have enough time to research this impeachment and how we can build a case of impeachment, because you see, just going cursorily, following the previous Supreme Court decisions that have found the conduct of sitting presidents to be unconstitutional, I've not heard it in the past. So this one, we need to research it. And each time, this is the second time I'm being asked this question, but look, after the interview, we have so many things to do. This case, I did it pro bono. This is the Domelevo case. I didn't charge money for it. You see, so I've moved on to other things. So sometimes you get caught at the wrong time. Maybe later I'll research it. But right now, look, I was in the middle of something when I was contacted for this interview. So I haven't had time to research this impeachment and beyond, since it came up. So maybe we can research it and then subsequently we can start a public debate on it.
Okay, and that's why I'm grateful that you're spending some time with us. And, congratulations will be in order for securing this very judgment. A landmark case indeed. But, Mr. Game, going forward, how do we reform our institutions to insulate themselves from political directives such as this? The usual framing is proceed on leave. It may come in some other forms. But going forward, how do we institute this directive from the Supreme Court?
Well, it's obvious. The higher institutions of learning must take advantage and change their teaching notes and ensure that people understand the applicability of the various sections of the Labour Act and in tandem with the 1992 Constitution, those relevant things. To be very honest with you, there are several things that are being done that are completely outside the expectations of what the law intends. And except in exceptional circumstances where the worker himself, herself, or the employer may request the worker to, postpone the leave for a short period to be taken within the same year, not another year. It must be with the consent of the worker himself. And not, this one was purely a partisan political approach, purely. And I'm happy the Supreme Court didn't fail the nation in this case. I know at least 2-3 of them who are on the listen that have done this kind of labor thing with them before. So I wasn't surprised they've come out with it so quite clearly. And so we must applaud them and the lawyers like Martin and the rest of them who went to tackle it. It's quite good.
And to send that signal across the entire realm of the estate, the point is being made that the president should issue a directive clarifying what it is that the Supreme Court has directed to all executive officers. So we're guided going forward. Will that be in order, and probably the president apologizing publicly?
I'm even surprised they have not done it yet, to be honest with you, because error means error. Error that remains error is not a very fine thing. If this were to be another country, he would have, he and his party would have suffered certain setbacks, under this. But Ghana being a very traditional, partisan, parochial kind of nation, that this is what we'll get out of it. But I'm happy at least the Supreme Court have done justice to it. But it's not too late. Administratively, the Chief of Staff should be seen to be doing this. by writing and letting the president know that this must go public, and everybody will applaud them if they should do it. Otherwise, it remains dead forever.
And we need to go. Lawyer Kwebu, any final thoughts on this?
Yes, my final thoughts are that, look, this particular decision, the way it's come down, I also joined the calls for the president at least to render an apology for his egregious constitutional breach. Yes, I think that will help so that it will show that with hindsight here, the Secretary to the President, Mr. Bijetu, that they are quite remorseful for their conduct. Because I remember at the time this thing came up, we granted interviews before I went into court. We were on Joy FM. I remember MFI interviewed me twice or three times on this matter. I was very clear that this is unconstitutional, this is unconstitutional, this is unconstitutional. But hey, this is Ghana. We said the president is A-rated. I mean, there's no lawyer of his caliber. He has no co-equal, and all those things people said. So if now with hindsight, it's turned out that he was, that's wrong, palpably wrong, I think an apology would do. Yeah, he should render one, especially in these times as he's lost the whole nation. You see that the nation is no longer with him. One error too many. The economy, he sunk us into so much trouble. He's not rendered an apology for it. People are dying. People can't buy drugs. People can't pay rent. The president doesn't care. He's not rendered any apology. Maybe he can add this Domlevo case to the economic morass, the economic decline he's thrown us into, and render one composite apology to cover the two, to heal the nation. Then we can start afresh again. We can't have this divided nation. He has to bring us together. This kind of, he's alone on one side, he and his appointees enjoying all the goodies of government while citizens are starving to death, citizens are dying. It can't continue that way. Otherwise, there will be an Arab Spring.
All right. And we'll have to leave it here for the sake of time. But I'm grateful for your time. That's Lawyer Martin Kwebu. And also to you, Austin Game, Labour consultant, for joining the conversation on Top Story, brought to you by Vodafone. Further together and blessed to that. Next is news.